To prologue, to not prologue, that is the question. Hi guys, today we're going to talk about if you should write a prologue or if you shouldn't. Me and Biro are kind of mean on this one. We don't like a prologue, do we? No, we don't. I'm not saying prologues are not useful. I'm not saying that I wouldn't read a book with a prologue. I do, and some prologues are fine and some prologues are needed. But a lot of the time, writers really don't need the prologue. If you do have a prologue, this does not mean it is wrong. In this video, we're going to go through when you should and when you shouldn't write a prologue and what the pros and cons are of prologues in general. First of all, what is a prologue? A prologue is a chapter which happens either before the main story or possibly in the future of the main story. This means that the story could continue past the prologue, but it's generally at a climactic point or just before it. There are 3 different reasons for the use of prologues. Reason 1, backstory. This could be the backstory to the world your character is in. It could be the backstory of a religion or philosophy which will affect the entire book, and you believe as the writer that the reader must know this information before reading the story for it all to make sense. 2, a different point of view. You can use the prologue to show a different point of view. Perhaps you want to show part of the story from the antagonist's point of view before the actual story begins. For example, if your antagonist is someone who's watched your protagonist grow up from being small and then attacks them when they're older, perhaps you want to pre-show the reader that the antagonist be watching, they're looking over this person. Why, from an evil point of view, they don't just kill them when they're a baby because that's easier. Apparently, evil people don't do that much. Number 3. To show the past or future of your protagonist. An example of this is in Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling uses chapter 1, which is technically a prologue, to show Harry Potter being left at the Dursleys' house. She could have named this a prologue, but she didn't, possibly to avoid people like me who have a tendency to skip the prologue. But she knew it was necessary, so she just named it chapter 1. That's another story. Or you can use it to show the future of your protagonist that your plot will get them to. So an example of this could be your protagonist becomes a king and the story is how they get there, and perhaps you want the reader to know at the start that this character is a king. Why? I don't know. I'm not writing this story. However, if you have a reason that they need to know something from the future in order to understand the rest of the book, then you can do this in a prologue. There are many pros and cons to prologues, so let's get into them. Pro 1. Builds interest. You can use a prologue to make the first chapter really snappy and catchy for the reader. I would argue that you could also just do this with chapter 1. However, if you feel the need, you can do this by giving the backstory of the character or a future part of the character story just to grab the reader's attention. You should have another reason other than this to use it though. Pro 2. To show background. I kind of already got into this before when we were talking about grabbing the reader and keeping interest, but sometimes it's also that you need to know a background in order to understand the story. If this is the case, then having a prologue is absolutely fine. If there's some information that we have to know, it's one way that you could give us it. Number 3. Introduce your antagonist. Number 4. To introduce a philosophy or religion. And number 5, to foreshadow. This is if you use the prologue to show a future event. So perhaps you want to foreshadow, as I said with the example of the king, that they will become a king and the story is how they got there. Or you need to foreshadow that they have gained some form of knowledge of something, or that they have found an object which is going to become the big event for the climax at the end of the story. Now for the bit which makes the most sense to me, the cons. Con number 1, stalls the reader. If you've written a prologue and all it does is make the reader wait to read the rest of the story just because you thought that would be interesting or needed, not so good. If your story can manage without a prologue, if you think the information can be put into the story, put it in the story. We don't need stalled at the beginning just to get the information. Con 2, gives away the plot. As in my king example, if the story is this boy or girl will become a king, that's great. But do we need to know that at the start, or could we just see that happen to them magically throughout the story? It depends. 3. The info dump. Do not info dump in a prologue. If you need to convey a massive amount of information, it's far better to sprinkle it throughout your story rather than dump it all in one chapter, in one big paragraph of doom, which will make your reader switch off, not take any of it in, and possibly put your book down. Number 4, your prologue is too long. A prologue should generally just be maybe 1 to 4 or 5 pages. If it is longer than this, really consider, could you just put it in the story or sprinkle it throughout, because a reader doesn't want to wait to start your story. They've chosen your book to read and they want to read it. They don't want to read about something that might happen later or a backstory which could be relevant but certain bits might not be. They want to start your story. They want to see what you've created. And number 6, the prologue has nothing to do with the main story. This sounds obvious, but if your prologue is nothing to do with the story and it's just something you wanted to write, put that as a short story in another book or anywhere else. Use it on your blog. Do enter some short story competitions. Do not put it at the start of your novel. It is not needed. It is confusing and we can do without it. Let's just read the book. So we've gone through the pros and cons. So ultimately, you need to decide as a writer, do you need a prologue? If there is information that has to be conveyed in order for the rest of the story to make sense, or you really feel like the audience needs to have a future foreshadowing glimpse into where the plot will go, then by all means write the prologue. If it's necessary, people will enjoy it and read it. If you're writing a prologue just to create interest, then perhaps make your first chapter more interesting. There's no point pushing the reader in the middle of a battle and then for the first chapter to be having breakfast on a farmyard. This doesn't make sense. Cut the breakfast and go into the story. And that's all I've got for you today. I hope you found this video useful. I am sorry, I am a prologue hating fiend, but at least you know people like me exist, and if you have an unnecessary prologue, we's gonna moan and we won't like it and I will not read it. I am more likely to just skip the prologue and start the story, whether or not that information was needed or not. If you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel. If you want to see as soon as I upload, click that little bell down below. If you want to see this information in written format, you can go to my website, the link is below this video. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram or Tumblr. I post general bookish pictures as well as some motivational pics as well. Thank you guys for watching, bye!